Hello and welcome back to another episode. Now today I want to talk a little bit about my memories of the Wii launch and I suppose some of the things that were happening in my life certainly at that time. Behind me I've got the Christmas 2006 copy of the official Nintendo magazine and at that point I was in my third and final year at university. So in some respects it was a very inconvenient time for a Nintendo console to launch. But this console, despite being incredibly busy and focusing and trying to build up to writing things like dissertations and this kind of thing, this console managed to cut through all of that with its fairly intense hype because of the new control mechanism, the fact that this was a follow-up to Nintendo's relatively lukewarm GameCube console, and also the possibility of playing Zelda Twilight Princess with motion controls. Now, I should just sort of take a step back for a second and just say that where I was living at the time, in a city called Durham, the Nintendo Wii seemingly wasn't a priority in terms of distribution. so instead of the consoles coming when they were expected to, what we got for several weeks before the console was meant to launch, but also after it had launched, was, well, we got the waggle stick. We got the Wiimote in stores on shelves in a really fairly clean packaging, and obviously this is a special edition with Motion Plus that came with Skyward Sword, but nonetheless it's the same size and shape. And I remember seeing this on store shelves and thinking, well, actually, just how small this thing is. It's quite an elegant, small little design, and I was up to speed in so much as I knew that it was motion controlled, that it had the IR sensor on the front, and that also you could hold this thing side on and play games NES style. Joypad and A and B button equivalent there, number 1 and 2. But I don't know. I was intrigued. In particular, for some reason, the clear plastic A button just looked very surgical to me. It looked very different from what had come before for Nintendo. Compare that to, for example, the GameCube controller with the great big green A button. Having this little clear plastic A button was intriguing. So these white little sort of, as I say, quasi-surgical instruments were appearing on our shelves, along with the nunchuck. What a cool name for a game console controller. And the nunchuck again was intriguing. It's about the same size as the central handle on an N64 controller, and in that sense the stick is in about the same place. Thankfully they'd made the stick a bit shorter though, so it's less, and also less likely to that infamous N64 stick erosion that you used to get, when you're playing GoldenEye intensively and then blew some dust out of the controller. So they'd fixed elements like that. It's very comfortable to hold in the hand, and also surprisingly, where the button placement was also comfortable. So it's the C and Z button, unconventional compared to other controllers that had come before, but together this I suppose deconstructed control scheme, where typically you might have all the buttons on one piece of plastic, having these two slightly separated out was pleasing, intriguing, and it got me and everyone I knew wondering what was going to come next, and also imagining the possibilities. One of those possibilities was catered for somewhat with one of the Wii's launch games, and that was Red Steel. Red Steel is a game that is not perfect by any means, but it is a game that was a ton of fun when it came out. Shooting combined with sword play, combined with the sort of the slightly visceral, intense sort of Japanese culture, music, and the pachinko machine area, I remember in particular being very vivid, was a wonderful way, again, just to try and underscore that the Wii was new, that it was different, and that it was not the same as the GameCube that had come before. I'll come back to that in a moment, but some of the launch titles for the console were quite promising. For example, in the EU we got Call of Duty 3, we got Happy Feet, That's less promising. Madden NFL 07, that's not one that I particularly noticed. Monster 4x4 World Circuit, okay. Need for Speed Carbon. Again, you know, some of these games were pointing towards the fact that they wanted to make a slightly more serious console than perhaps some people thought that the GameCube had been, but also an accessible console. Rampage, Total Destruction, Red Steel, oh yes, SpongeBob SquarePants, Creature from the Krusty Krab, Super Monkey Ball Banana Blitz, a brilliant launch title, because again it was a really good way of showing how the movement of the Wiimote in particular could be translated into on-screen movement of the monkey ball, as it were. Let's see. Wii Sports and Wii Play, of course. Now, Wii Sports was the first game that we got for the most part, I think, as Wii owners, and the first game that we would all try and encourage our friends to play to show them how good the Wii was would be Wii Golf and Wii Tennis on that disc. And essentially it was basically it's a demo disc, isn't it? It's showing what the console can do. And I remember in particular having this game set up downstairs in the house where I was living, the so-called man house. I've got one photo in particular from that time that it sort of illustrates the living room space a little bit, where all the posters on the wall were mine. I had brought them with me, and I decided to decorate the living room. Everyone benefited in that sense. But also as well, I remember the Wii obviously was mine, and I brought the Wii console as a treat to myself and everyone else who were going through fairly intense study time in that third year of university. And I remember there being one person in particular in the house, I won't name them, being very, very cynical about the Wii, saying that it was just a gimmick console. And I think that right from the beginning is one of the things that kind of stopped the Wii achieving its full potential, was this concept of it being a gimmick console, of being a console on which sports games, quiz games and shovelware were most at home. Because actually the Wii had lots of potential, but unfortunately that potential was slightly undermined by the initial version of the waggle stick or the Wiimote controller. So for example with tennis, when we were first playing that game, it didn't take long to realise that you didn't actually have to swing your bat to actually get the ball to go. All you needed to do was just flick, because it's an accelerometer. Excuse me. It's not actually measuring the movement of the controller through space, it's measuring how quickly you're flicking that controller. And so you could get very good at tennis without actually moving really very much, which was a sign of weakness in the eyes of those people who thought that the console was a gimmick. They just went, see, it's just all it's a lie, it's all fake. But I think beyond that initial sort of very soft introduction with Wii Sports, that games like Red Steel showed little bits of potential. Like I've talked about this in the past, where I was very impressed that there's a moment in that game where a phone rings out of the controller, because obviously the controller has a microphone, a speaker, on it, and so you could sort of put the controller up to your ear to maybe listen to a phone conversation. I loved the rumble. I loved the fact that you did actually have the ability to hear reloading sound effects like coming out of here, separate from the TV screen. So much potential that in those early days I was so excited by. And again, I think I've talked about previously this idea that maybe you could have had games where there were animals hiding in the bush or something, and you'd have to listen out for where that animal might be on the screen, almost like an old sort of cartoon, sort of old, hello Sonny, Jim, sort of thing, deaf person in a Looney Tunes cartoon. But there's so much potential which was never fully realised, and now I'm sorry to say that actually some of those people were right. Some of those people who said that the console was essentially boiled down to gimmicks were potentially right in the overall scheme of things. Not least because the console wasn't that different from what came before in terms of graphical capacity, in terms of raw just power. Really, it was a slightly upgraded version of the GameCube, and that was reflected so explicitly in the fact that Twilight Princess launched on both GameCube and Wii at the same time, more or less. The fact that that you could have this crossover without much in the way of graphical difference. Again, it was another easy win for those people who were very cynical about the new Nintendo console. And so I did play the Twilight Princess GameCube game when it first came out. That was the console that I had, and at the time I simply couldn't wait. So I went out and played it and loved it and completed it on the GameCube. And when it came out on Wii, everything had been flipped because Link historically has been a left-handed hero. But on the Wii version, they felt that right-handedness was more common and therefore was the ideal, and so they flipped the whole game. They mirrored it so that Link now was right-handed, and you could play the game using slicing actions, for example, to farm for rupees in the grass. I remember doing that so much. I loved the fact that again this broken apart control scheme was paying dividends. You could be running around in the grass and all the while slashing as you went. It was fantastic. It was a liberating experience, which was in many ways fulfilled properly in the shape of Skyward Sword, although Skyward Sword does have problems as a Zelda game. I love the control scheme in that game. It's not perfect, but it is very close to being perfect in terms of just that sense of interaction, that freedom of being able to swing your sword. This game delivered on that, or this console delivered on that. It also delivered in terms of later it would come to deliver in terms of shooting with in the form of Metroid Prime. The Metroid Prime 3 essentially was optimized. It was released on the Wii, and it was optimized for that sort of light gun experience. And there were other games that tried to deliver that but didn't quite succeed. For example, Mad Dog McCree, which we've talked about on a previous video. And then again, I think slightly undermined the overall library. You've got to admit, the library of the Wii is slightly bloated with bad games. It's unfortunate, but it's true. But in those early days, my hopes were high, and I was very, very much on board. Of course, soon after Christmas, I had to dive back into serious study and all this kind of thing. And by the time the summer rolled around, there was a better selection of games, and I was able to properly enjoy playing the Wii. I've always appreciated the fact that the Wii and the GameCube are, in terms of dimensions, designed to be, in the case of, I think in the GameCube, 10 CD discs tall. In the case of the Wii, it's I think it's 4 DVD cases tall or wide. I liked that. I very much appreciated the relatively small, sleek nature of these Nintendo consoles, because again, compared to what came before, Nintendo never seemingly used to care about bulk. So the N64 was a very bulky console, whereas the Wii felt, as I say, from the controller to the console itself, it felt somewhat small and pared down, surgical, as I say. And also, actually, another game which I do remember playing at that time and enjoying was the Gottlieb pinball collection. I've been looking for a decent pinball game to play on console ever since I first played Psycho Pinball on the Mega Drive, and the Gottlieb pinball collection got fairly, it's close. It's a close approximation of why I love pinball games, in particular Psycho Pinball. It's not quite there though, but this again was brilliant because you could shake the pinball table, you could do independent motion in terms of the paddles as you were using them. It felt good to play pinball on the Wii, and that's basically, I suppose, that's really where my thesis, as it were, ends up, is the fact that the Wii was a console that felt good to play. It had some novelty at the time. For example, the use of the Bluetooth element for the controllers was at the time very exciting. It was very exciting to see the lights light up and tell you which player you were. It was very exciting to be able to turn off the console using the power button on the Wiimote. It sounds naff, it sounds weird now to think that was exciting, but it was at the time. But also it was exciting to see some of your childhood dreams come about because of this console. Lightsaber combat, for example, in the form of Force Unleashed in particular, that was a very fun game to play with the Wiimote. And also actually the potential to see certain sci-fi tropes come into fruition with the Wiimote. So this is obviously the Doctor Who screwdriver version of the Wiimote. And so in that sense you are in fact doing what the Doctor does, but on a Nintendo console. I love it. And I always will. I simply always will. I'll always love those early days of the Wii, the arguments that we got into. And for example, this housemate of mine put his older brother on the phone once to me to sort of, at the time I think his older brother was working for Sony, just to sort of basically shout at me, tell me no, Nintendo is rubbish. But not only were we having arguments, but also we were all embracing the potential of this console. And in some respects it delivered, but I think overall, sadly, unfortunately, for me at least, the Wii was a slight disappointment. It didn't quite deliver on what it could have been. Because I think maybe it was just a bit too hard to program for, or maybe it was Nintendo allowed too many developers just to throw in a tokenistic waggle to win sort of mechanic. So instead of actually thinking about how the game might be played, for example, a game like Second Opinion, the surgical simulator, where actually there's quite a lot of thought going into how you're using the control scheme to achieve your goal. In other games it would just be a case of, oh, characters running away from something, waggle the stick, and that would be about it. And it's a shame, because as I say, there's so many little things that the game console could do relatively accurately that should and could have been used in more inventive ways than just on some of those key, usually Nintendo first party, or for example in the case of Atlas games, Japanese and creative studio games, where they did think about the medium. I suppose there was a nod towards the potential of the console in the releasing Call of Duty 3 as a Second World War experience. And I think there were a couple of Call of Duty games that came out utilising that sort of light gun potential. But really, the best version of a light gun game, was Metroid Prime 3, and also actually Red Steel 2, which I still love. But that wasn't a launch title, and neither of those were launch titles. So, potential. That's basically what this game console boiled down to, and its launch boiled down to that as well. So I'll just bring this to a close by saying that there's one thing I really learned from my early years, my first year with the Wii console, I guess, was patience. Patience in terms of waiting for the console in particular. As I say, it was late to shelves in that sense. But also patience, just seeing what was what, not just going for the hype. In that sense, I was an early hype adopter. But one game that really, put the brakes on was Spider-Man 3. I was so excited. Having played Spider-Man 2, for example, on the GameCube, still my favourite Spider-Man game of all time. I was so excited for the potential of these guys when it came to web slinging. This kind of thing. I had a vision in my mind as to what that game was going to be like, and so I rushed out and bought it. I sold a couple of key games that I later repurchased, but I remember selling some games to get Spider-Man 3, and it wasn't as good as it could have been. It had some of it. It had some elements like you could sort of swing enemies around your head and this kind of thing. But the actual implementation of the web slinging, in particular the possibility of having hand-to-hand swinging along, and it just didn't work as well as it could or should have done. And so patience, I learned I learned not just to rush in on anything really. I mean, with the exception of Zelda Breath of the Wild, I think in the years since the Wii, I have always waited and seen, what's that game like? What is this console like? What's the benefits and crucially, where does it not quite succeed before I've purchased? Because the Wii, as I say, it was wonderful, a wonderful potential, but it was also in some places slightly disappointing, unfortunately. Anyway, guys, hopefully this has been familiar. Hopefully you guys can sort of relate to that sort of Wii launch experience. The fact that people were cynical, the fact that lots of people were getting involved in Wii as well. It was very exciting because, you know, you heard about old ladies, for example, playing the console, didn't you, at that time? But also, ultimately, the Wii, even though it blew sales out of the water, I think it technically won the 7th generation, as it were. Not that I like that terminology, you know, but anyway. It technically, you know, outsold its rivals. It also could have been managed a bit better, and quality control could and should have been better. I didn't need to see, you know, a dozen party games or, you know, another carnival fun game or whatever. I needed to see well implemented versions of that, and that wasn't always the case. Anyway, as ever, until next time, do take care. Bye bye.